Hey up everyone, and welcome back to another video, and in this one I'm going to be showing you how to draw a wet dog in charcoal. I already previously did a tutorial using this piece on how to do the foliage that the dogs are sitting in, so I'll link to that above and you can go and have a look at that if that's of interest to you as well. I was commissioned to do this drawing about a year ago now, and it's 3 wet spaniels sitting in some foliage, and you can see I've already done 1 spaniel so you can see what they already look like when they're finished. And then I did the tutorial using the second spaniel. First things first is I'm just going to add the whites in, and it's just getting some whites onto paper, which is going to be blended later, so you don't need to be like really tidy with it or putting any air strokes or like that in. It's just getting some charcoal onto paper. The only thing I tend to do is I work in the direction that the air's growing in when I'm just applying it onto paper, so if you try to apply it like at a right angle to what the air grows at, it might just be a little bit more difficult to make it look the way you want it. You know, when you blend it and what have you, it might just still look like it's going in the wrong direction, so best off just applying it in a way that the air grows on dog, even though you're going to be blending it all in. So now I've finished adding whites, I'm coming in with blacks, and I'm just going to do exactly the same with them as what I did with whites. And I'll get these all mapped in before I start doing any blending. And meanwhile, if you want to know what I'm actually using in this drawing, I've listed all my supplies below in description, so you can go and have a look at that if you're wanting to know what I'm using. I have sped the footage up so that it's just not going to take so long, because really long videos have a really low retention on them as well. Most people don't want to sit through them, but I try not to speed it up too much that you can't see what I'm doing. I'm just trying to do like a middle ground thing, so let me know if this speed sort of suits you, or if you'd prefer to have it slower or faster or what. You can just mention in comments. So once I've mapped in all the blacks and whites, I'm just going to come in with this blending stump now, and I'll just start blending the blacks first, and then I'll blend the whites afterwards. At first there's a lot of paper still showing through, but when I've done the blending, that will pretty much get rid of that, and it'll mostly cover it up. There's areas where you do still want some paper to be showing through, because you use it as part of the tonal range. So like shaded areas on the whites and also highlighted areas on the black areas, you can leave some paper showing through, because it sort of helps with getting the tonal range. So now that's all blended, I'm coming back in with the black charcoal pencil, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push the darks some more as well. Now, even though these are liver and white spaniels, so they're not black, because they're wet, the fur will look darker in places. You tend to get more contrast on wet fur because the wetness makes it look darker, but then when light shines on it, you get more sort of noticeable highlights than what you'd get on if it were like dry fur. So the contrast between the dark areas and the highlights from the light shining on it is partly what will help it look wet. And it also gives me a chance to just refine things and tidy things up a little bit as well, because things can get a little bit messy when you're just blending things with a stump. So now I'm just going over these latest darks I've applied with blending stump again, just to soften them that little bit. I'm not going to go too heavy-handed with blending stump at this stage. It's just to soften them that little bit and not to really blend it into paper and get rid of your actual markings that you've made. So I'm back with the white pencil, and now to add these highlights. And what you've got to remember about wet fur is that it has a way of keeping the dog dry by forming spikes. So you get like a clump of hair that sort of forms a spike with lots of hairs going to a point, and then the water will drip to the end of that point and drip off, and it takes it away from the dog's skin. So the hair can look a bit spiky. On longer hair, like on the spaniel's ears, it'll just form like long spirally clumps, and it's important to not try and draw any individual hairs in this situation. You've got to just draw the actual clumps that have formed, and all you're doing is adding the highlights with the lights reflecting off this wet fur, and then just leaving the dark areas to just do the job of the shadows, you know, that you've already applied underneath. So you don't want to be covering all dark up, you just want to be drawing these clumps on top of your shadows with your white pencil. Obviously on places like the ears, you know, it's going to be a little bit wavy and they're going to intertwine with each other a little bit and be a bit curved. Don't just draw them like in straight lines and that sort of thing. And also where you get long strands, you might get highlights along parts of its length, so areas where it bends into light, and then it might be darker where it bends away from the light source. So you're not going to get like a highlight going all the way down it uniformly. And applying highlights and shadows like that will help to give the impression that it's actually wavy as well. And another difference between applying highlights to make it look wet as opposed to dry is that you don't really want to be blending these highlights. They're going to be a little bit more abrupt and not as soft looking as when you get highlights on dry fur. So you've got these quite noticeable strokes that you leave as actual strokes, because that looks like the clumps of hair that have formed because it's wet, with shadows in between these clumps. And the hair would not be laying like that if it were dry. It would be sort of, it wouldn't have formed the clumps like on the face and the head where it's short. It wouldn't be forming clumps like when it's wet. So it wouldn't have the streaky look that it gets when it's wet, when it's dry, if you understand what I'm saying. And you can see I've just come back in with a black pencil here just to redefine some of these shadows between these white strokes as well, just to emphasize that effect. So moving on to the white hair on chest, you'll see that it's got quite a spiky appearance, and the actual spikes themselves look really white, and then you've got the slightly darker shadows in between them, which is sort of similar kind of shade as the paper I'm working on, so I'm going to let the paper do some at work when it comes to the shadows on chest. If you look at the actual hair growth, you'll notice that the spikes sort of at middle at chest, they curve round and then point back to middle at chest as you come towards the bottom. And then when you come round to the sides on the shoulders, it actually faces in a different direction and starts to point back towards the back at shoulder and away from viewer. So you have to just bear in mind these differences in the direction that the air and the clumps and spikes that they're formed are laying in. Notice I'm not trying to make everything exactly the same as reference photo. I am working quite fast and loose with these charcoal pencils. My aim is not to be as detailed and as possible, you know, like with my acrylic paintings where I'm getting every tiny little last detail in. I do try and loosen up a little bit with charcoal. It still looks quite effective, and it probably does look more detailed than it actually is, to be fair. But main thing is to not get bogged down in trying to make it exactly the same, every last little clump and all that kind of thing. Just don't make it exactly the same as a reference photo. Just use your reference photo as a general guide. So I'm just using a blending stump here just to soften things up slightly, but I'm hardly making any changes to actual strokes and markings that I've put on. And then I'll come back in with black and just redefine a few shadows. And the other thing that I need to do is the long strands of hair that are hanging from ends of his ears need to be drawn in, because obviously I didn't want to do them before and try and draw the white fur behind around them, so I just left them out for the time being, did the white fur on the neck, and then we'll add them in after doing that, so it's just easier to put them back in on top of the work that's underneath. So there's a darker patch on front at neck and chest here, so I'm just going to be adding some dark streaks between the actual clumps. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend them out, and they're just going to create shadows between the clumps and make the area a little bit darker. I'm being careful not to blend the clumps themselves too much, because I want them to stand out against the darker gaps in between them. And then finally I just add a few white strands of at top to finish that area off. And now all there is to do is finish off that bit of leg there and the bit of back leg that's showing as well. You'll notice there's a little bit of spotting on the front leg, like flecking, so just got to include them in, and then that's the dog all done. And I hope you found this video useful. I will show you the finished piece afterwards. And then I have added another little clip of my dogs at the end and their little escapades. I think I'm going to do this with every video now, just so that people can have a little bit of a smile at some at the end of my videos. So I'll leave you to watch the end of this, and I'll leave it at that for this video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!